Hey, Irene, let's talk about sex.
Ooh.
Bet you didn't expect that.
Hey, you know, I was debating various ways we could start this.
Hey, friends, you're watching BrainStormAcres. I'm Henry.
And I'm Irene.
And yeah, sure enough, we're going to talk about sex today.
Most specifically, sex in the garden. Now,
That sounds fun. You're speechless.
you see, I'll incriminate myself no matter what I say. I'm sure for the flowers, it is fun, or at least part of their job.
Not everything needs to have sex.
Nope. In fact, a significant percentage of what people actually eat from the garden does not require sex at all.
Well, there's things like, cabbage, kohlrabi, radishes,
Spinach, kale, lettuce. All those things require sex in order to have the seeds, but we don't eat them during that part of their existence.
Yeah, the seeds really aren't a whole lot of fun because there's not much to them most of the time. And
Yeah, well, there are odd things.
Doesn't taste great.
Right. Well, there are odd things like you can use the seeds, say from radishes, and you can sprout them, and you can use them for microgreens and things like that. But that's a different thing. In your garden, there's plenty of things that don't require sex in order for you to have vegetables.
So we ought to talk about male flowers and female flowers.
We have gotten a whole stack of questions over the years. It seems like every year there's several, at least. People are confused. And
Confused about males and females?
I'm not going to touch that. Anyway, don't touch that. No. Anyway.
I was thinking about the George Michael song about, let's talk about.
Sex, baby, let's talk about you and... Yes. Anyway, we always joke that if you can't stand the fact that I will break into song occasionally, we can't be friends. Anyway, so... But he does the same thing. It'll be... one of us will use a line from a song and then look at the other person to see if they know where it came from and what the next line is. But I have a lot of friends who do that too, so it's normal.
There's certain plants that the male flowers are pretty obvious and the female flowers are really obvious.
Right. Now, a lot of the things that we grow in the garden have a combination flower. Tomatoes, okra, peppers, both male and female parts are in the same flower and they do their own thing. Green beans, pole beans.
So you have a stamen and a pistil.
That's the classic flower you study in biology. They don't usually talk very much about the fact that some plants have separate parts. And the cucurbits are a family that definitively has separate parts.
Yeah. Cucurbits include
melons, watermelons, so that's all the cantaloupes in addition to the watermelons and all that stuff. Cucumbers.
My favorite.
All the summer squashes, all the winter squashes. Now, there are differences between some of those things in terms of who will breed with whom and who won't and all that kind of stuff. That's a whole other thing. That's a whole other field of study. But basically, you have definitively different flowers.
Now, we've had one question that happens every year, several times a year, and that is, I have this nice looking, let's say, squash, really small, but it doesn't really develop.
Yeah, it's because what you probably had was a female and there were no male flowers around. When cucumbers, cantaloupe, any of those beasts start up their growing cycle, sometimes the first 2 or 3 dozen flowers they will produce will all be males.
And that's a waste.
It's a waste. I mean, it's perfectly lovely to look at the flowers and go, oh, nice, the bees are happy. But it's not going to get you anywhere because the male flowers don't do anything for you. They just they're pretty. They give the bees something to eat.
Well, if there's a female flower there too, they do something good.
That's right. But they provide the pollen, but if there's no females to pollinate, nothing's going to happen.
Nope.
So basically, the best way to describe most male flowers is they look like something a kid would draw.
Well, if you look at the zucchini, we have a really great series of pictures of zucchinis that show a flower,
Big flower.
on the end of
A stick.
a stick.
So it's just basically your stem, and it's got the flower on top of it. And there's nothing in between. It's like the flower is just plopped on top the way a little kid would draw a flower.
Now, there's another kind of flower, too.
Okay?
It goes on top of something that's going to actually turn into fruit.
Right. Well, I think of it as the uterus for the plant.
Well, that's exactly what it is.
You've got, it's some sort of a bulbous construct, and it will change shape depending on what kind of fruit it is. So in the zucchini picture, we have the male flower, which is just sitting there on the stick, and we have a female flower, which has what looks like a little teeny itty bitty zucchini underneath it.
Well, it is. It's a zucchini about ready to turn into a real zucchini.
Right.
If it gets pollinated.
On the cantaloupe, it's going to be a little ball. On the butternuts, it's going to be a little ball. On the cucumber, it's going to be a little bitty cucumber.
Yeah, it looks exactly, well, the cucumbers that we have growing in the greenhouse show this really, really nicely, because you see maybe a cucumber that's an inch long.
It can be as long as 1.5 inches before it's even opened to flower.
And it looks like a cucumber.
Mm-hmm. And that's the female. And then the males will just look like a flower on a stick. Where this really becomes important is if you have some of the specialty cucumbers. There are types of cucumbers out there that only produce female flowers. And the problem, and this always drives me crazy. Okay, so you plant, they expect you to plant a whole package.
Well, so you have a bunch of female plants.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get them pregnant?
Right, you have to have a pollinator plant. And the problem is what they do use, they give you a mixed bag.
Yes,
now,
sir.
what I've always thought they should do is they should give you a little Ziploc inside that would give you the boys and the females in the regular packet, because as a small producer, somebody who's got a small garden, I'm not going to plant an entire package of seeds.
So there might be 25 female seeds in a package, and there might only be 3 or 4 males.
But there's no way to tell that. I've never seen anybody mark their seeds so that you could tell which ones were the males.
You can't just look at the seed and tell which one's male and which one's female?
No, they look like a seed. There's absolutely nothing definitive about it. Or if you're doing we only grow female flowers, cucumbers, and they've got fancy names for them. I don't remember what the names are. I could look it up. But if you only have the female flowers, you've got to have another cucumber plant around that will have both males and females. Otherwise, you have no cucumbers.
And that's a problem, that if you're growing vegetables that have separate sexes, especially if you have seeds that are only going to be female flowers,
Mm-hmm.
you have to have a pollinator somewhere that will make those female flowers bear fruit. Otherwise, you're going to have fruit that at best is small, the inside may be hollow.
Yeah.
It won't taste good. It won't yield good.
Right.
It's just not what you want.
Yeah, it's like if something goes wrong with your corn. That's another perfect example of sex in the garden. The tassel is the male. That's the one that comes out on top and makes you sneeze. The little corn ears, which form all over the place and put out the silk, in order for you to get a kernel of corn, a piece of the pollen from the tassel on the top of that corn stalk needs to fall down on every single piece of that silk. It then migrates down the little tube of the silk into, this is wow, talk about complicated. Migrates down the little silk into and that's where you get a corn kernel. And we've all seen corn where you strip it off and there's corn kernels missing. And sometimes in your own gardens, you get a really poor pollination and you'll wind up with big sections missing.
Well, you know, there's some things that happen with corn that are interesting. One is that if the temperatures aren't right at the right time and the water's not right at the right time,
Yeah.
you won't get pollination, which means you're not going to have
Right,
fully
because
formed ears.
what happens is the pollen will come off at the wrong time for the silk on the ears, and they won't be coordinated. And we've actually seen, and this was very cool, it was one of those things that we just happened
I'll
across.
bet you're going to talk about hybridizing corn.
Yeah, you know, have you ever thought about how they would do that?
We have, but you know, I didn't know how they did it.
I didn't know how they did it either until we were driving past a cornfield and we realized that they had cut off all the tops of the corn. All those little fluffy guys with all the pollen were gone. And I'm like, oh, they're going to hybridize this field. So what they were doing is they chopped all of the corn tops off of, so the ears are sitting there, the females are sitting there going, hello, hello, I'm waiting.
I need some pollen.
I need some pollen. And I don't know how they provide the pollen, but whether they had something planted next to it or whether they spray it on, or I don't know what they do.
Stunt corn.
Stunt corn, that's it, yes. Oh, Lord.
I think we ought to show a progression of male and female flowers that we've taken in our outdoor garden and in the greenhouse, because we have a nice collection of different plants
Different
with
varieties of
different
stuff.
kinds of flowers.
Right.
Now, what's difficult until you've seen it a few times is to identify, especially among the small flowers, the males versus the females.
Right, that's tougher. That's tougher. On the things like the zucchini, gosh, it couldn't be more obvious.
If you can't see that, you can't see anything.
glasses.
I could see those without my glasses. We're not going to talk about sizes.
Right.
Except to say that some varieties of some plants have really big flowers with really big sex organ at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Other plants have really small flowers with almost non-existent bases of them. So it's difficult to tell before there's swelling of that fruit body that it's actually a female flower. So,
Right.
but there's ways to find out. You know, if you look at those flowers and you look inside, you'll see all those anthers. That's those little pieces that hold the pollen. And those are the male flowers. Well, if you don't see that in the other flowers, they're female flowers, probably.
Probably. There are some weird ones, and that's why I thought about, well, I could get a picture, and then I thought, no, because there are some odd things out there where it's kind of like on a regular flower that a kid will draw a picture of, you got a stem and you got petals. But then there's the green part that's underneath the petals, which is called sepals. And except in some plants when it's actually a converted, oh, geez, it gets very complicated. For your average gardener, the important thing to know is there's a bunch of plants like lettuce and stuff like that that don't require sex unless we're looking for seeds at the end of the season. We eat the plants before they start to go to seed. In fact, if we don't, a lot of the stuff becomes inedible. All the nightshades, to my knowledge, there's not a single nightshade out there that is not a combined flower, and they do their own thing. Sometimes in greenhouse situations, like CB at CB's Greenhouse and Garden has talked about, he goes along and he shakes the plants. In our greenhouse, we don't usually need to do that because our fan actually blows hard enough on the plants, or we could make it blow hard enough, like at least a couple times a day. I'll go out there and crank that fan up, and it'll make the plants do this. That's the same thing as going along and shaking it.
Do you have any idea what time it is?
I think it's time to tell people that they need to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we know that a whole bunch of you people out there are watching this who are not subscribing, and it would really be helpful if you would tell YouTube that you like our stuff, and the best way to do that is to subscribe.
You know, the other thing is, I'm going to put a card at the end of this show to CB's Greenhouse and Garden. You ought to go over and take a look at what he's doing. He's doing some really practical stuff.
Other than that, it's time for us to get on with it.
You know what I have to say?
Bye.
Hey, don't forget to brainstorm, because you learn a lot.
Keep on brainstorming.
you.